When God stays silent, it is not a sign of his absence. It is the evidence of his strategy. I need you to hear me in the spirit. When heaven goes quiet, it is because God is positioning you for a victory that will defy every expectation of the enemy. There are moments when you pray, when you cry out, when you wage war in the secret place, and it feels like the heavens are shut. But I declare to you today, silence is not defeat. Silence is the sound of God sharpening his sword on your behalf. Silence is the pause before the supernatural intervention that dismantles every adversary assigned to your life. Psalm 109 is not the cry of a weak believer. It is the battle cry of someone who understands that divine justice has its own timing. While the enemy schemes in the dark, God watches from his throne. While they whisper against you, heaven is preparing a verdict in your favor. And when God chooses not to speak, he is letting every enemy dig their own pit, letting every trap turn back on the one who set it, letting every curse boomerang to ascend. You are not abandoned. You're being defended in ways you cannot yet see. So stand still, stand firm, stand with the confidence that when God is silent, he is not ignoring you. He is exposing them. He is allowing the enemy to overplay their hand, so that when he rises as the God who vindicates, the God who overturns, the God who causes every adversary to fall by their own devices today. Get ready. Heaven's silence is about to become your loudest victory. There are seasons in life when you find yourself praying with intensity, seeking God with sincerity, and crying out from the depths of your soul. Yet, all you encounter is silence. That silence can feel heavy. It can feel unsettling. It can make you question whether heaven has turned his face away from you. But what many fail to understand is that the silence of God is not the abandonment of God. His silence is often his greatest form of strategy, a divine tactic through which he orchestrates breakthroughs that you could not perceive with natural eyes. When God appears to be still, he is actually moving in realms beyond your awareness. When it seems like nothing is happening, everything is happening. Heaven has a cadence, a rhythm, a frequency. And sometimes silence is the sound of God rearranging the spiritual landscape for your protection and elevation. And there are times when God hushes his voice because your enemies are speaking, not because their words have power over you, but because he wants them to reveal themselves fully. Silence becomes the spiritual spotlight that exposes the intentions, motives, and hidden operations of those who pretend to be allies but harbor sabotage in their hearts. When God goes quiet, he allows the enemy to overextend, overreach, and ultimately indict themselves through their own actions. In the silence of God, the enemy thinks he is advancing, but in reality, he is being set up for defeat. Every plot, every whisper, every scheme is being recorded in heaven's courts. Nothing escapes the attention of an all-seeing God, even when he does not speak. God's silence has always been one of his greatest strategies. Throughout Scripture, we see moments when God withheld immediate response because he was working behind the scenes. Think of Joseph abandoned in prison, David hiding in caves, Job sitting in ashes, Jesus standing before Pilate without uttering a word. Each of these individuals encountered the silence of God, not because God had withdrawn himself, but because God was constructing a victory that required stillness, timing, and divine orchestration. Heaven sometimes falls silent because God is positioning people, shifting circumstances, dismantling demonic structures, and aligning events so that the victory is undeniable. God's silence often precedes his supernatural intervention. When God stays silent, he is not ignoring your prayers. He is answering them in a way that transcends your understanding. Silence is the space in which divine preparation happens. It is the atmosphere in which God shields you from premature battles and unnecessary warfare. There are enemies that you do not even know exist. There are conversations spoken behind your back that God heard, but you didn't. There are traps that were set in the dark that God dismantled without ever informing you. Silence is the strategy of a God who sees what you cannot see and knows what you cannot know. It is the protection of a God who fights battles you are not even aware of. There are breakthroughs that require silence because premature revelation would open the door for interference. Sometimes God quiets his voice because if he disclosed his plan too soon, the enemy would attempt to sabotage what heaven is building. Silence becomes the shield of divine confidentiality. Haven holds its peace while God ensures that nothing and no one can obstruct the blessing that is being prepared for you. What feels like delay is often divine concealment. What feels like inactivity is often spiritual construction. What feels like loneliness is often God separating you from voices that cannot go where you are going. Silence is not a void. Silence is a covering. In Psalm 109, David cries out because he does not hear an immediate response from God. Yet during that silence, his enemies are exposing themselves. Their words reveal their hearts. Their actions revealed their intentions. Their aggression reveals their insecurity. David's silence became their downfall. God allowed them to speak long enough to condemn themselves. He allowed them to rise high enough so that when they fell, their collapse would be undeniable. Heaven's silence became David's vindication. The same pattern repeats in your life. God lets your enemies reveal themselves before he delivers you. When God stays silent, he is giving your enemies enough space to hang themselves with their own rope. He is allowing them to think they have the upper hand. They believe their plans are succeeding, but heaven is watching. They believe their words will destroy you, but God turns every weapon into dust. They believe their betrayal will break you, but God uses betrayal as the doorway to elevation. When God is silent, it is because he is letting the enemy walk right into the trap they prepared for you. Silence is the stage upon which divine justice performs its greatest act. The silence of God also purifies your faith. It forces you to trust him beyond what you feel. It pulls you out of emotional Christianity into mature spirituality. It teaches you that faith is not built on constant reassurance, but on unwavering belief in character. Silence pushes you to dig deeper, pray harder, believe stronger, and anchor yourself in the truth that God is working even when you cannot trace him. Silence develops spiritual stamina. It strengthens your discernment. It elevates your spiritual perception. It matures your relationship with God because it teaches you to depend on his nature rather than his noise. And while you are navigating God's silence, every enemy that rose against you begins to weaken. Your silence in response to their accusations becomes a weapon of its own. You do not have to clap back. You do not have to defend your name. You do not have to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. When God is silent, he is teaching you to be silent too. Not because you are powerless, but because you are dangerous. Your silence is the sign that you trust God to respond for you. And when God responds, he responds with finality. When God speaks after silence, his judgment overturns every lie, every trap, every scheme, every curse spoken against you. You are never more protected than when God is silent. You are never more defended than when heaven holds its peace. You are never more secure than when God says nothing. Silence is the cocoon in which transformation happens. It is the forge in which resilience is formed. It is the proving ground where God tests your heart and prepares your elevation. Silence is where warriors are made, where destinies are refined, where breakthroughs are birthed. The enemy fears a believer who stays faithful in silence because such a believer cannot be manipulated by emotion or circumstance. Silence builds spiritual strength that cannot be shaken. The silence of God is not passive. It is not empty. It is not void. It is divine activity hidden from human sight. Heaven is never still. God is never idle. Even when he gives no answer, he is answering. Even when he gives no sign, he is moving. Even when he gives no instruction, he is directing every step. Silence is the womb of supernatural outcomes, the threshold of divine manifestations, the atmosphere in which battles are won without you lifting a finger. When God stays silent, He is orchestrating your victory layer by layer, moment by moment, ensuring that when the breakthrough comes, it comes in a way that gives him all the glory and leaves your enemies with no explanation. Every enemy that rises against you becomes an unwitting contributor to your destiny when God allows them to expose their own intentions. There are seasons when adversaries appear, not because you are weak, but because you are becoming dangerous. The increase in spiritual resistance is often the indicator that heaven has elevated your assignment. And when God permits your enemies to manifest, it is never to destroy you, but to reveal the truth about who they are and who you are becoming. The presence of an enemy does not signify defeat. It signifies promotion. God uses the hostility of your adversaries as a divine spotlight to uncover hidden agendas, uproot toxic connections, and several alliances that can no longer accompany you into your next dimension. Every enemy is a tool in the hand of God, shaping, sharpening, and preparing you for the place He intends to take you. Enemies emerge in transitional seasons. They show up when you're on the threshold of breakthrough, when you are walking into new levels of authority, when you are outgrowing old versions of yourself. And God, in His sovereignty, allows these adversaries to step into the open because their exposure is necessary for your elevation. When people rise against you, speak against you, or scheme against you, it is not a sign of abandonment, but a sign of divine filter. God permits their hostility so you can discern who truly stands with you and who only stood with your benefits. Their actions reveal their heart, and their heart reveals why they cannot follow you where you are going. God cleans your environment by allowing certain individuals to reveal their true colors through their attacks, jealousy, or betrayal. Every enemy in your life is functioning as a spiritual catalyst. They push you into realms of prayer you would not have entered unless pressure came. They activate dimensions of faith that would have remained dormant without contention. They drive you into deeper intimacy with God because adversity has a way of stripping away distractions and forcing clarity. Enemies push you from comfort into calling. They shake you loose from stagnation. They provoke you to discover strength you didn't know you carried. And while they believe they are hindering you, they are actually propelling you into purpose. The very resistance designed to break you becomes the force that builds you. When God allows an enemy to rise, He is also allowing a revelation to rise. The revelation of your identity, your authority, your resilience, your divine backing. You never truly understand the weight of your calling until something attempts to crush it. You never fully recognize the power within you until something attempts to silence it. And you never grasp the greatness God has placed upon you until something tries to diminish it. Your enemy becomes the mirror through which God shows you who you really are. What they attack reveals what God is trying to awaken in you. What they challenge reveals what God has ordained for you. What they resist reveals the direction heaven is pushing you toward. Enemies unintentionally confirm your anointing. They validate your assignment. They authenticate your calling. In Psalm 19, David's adversaries rose not because he was powerless, but because he was chosen. Their accusations, slander, and attacks were spiritual reactions to divine elevation. The more God lifted David, the more the enemy manifested. This is a pattern that repeats throughout the lives of every man and woman God uses. Elevation attracts oppositions. Favor provokes resistance. Anointing awakens adversaries, but none of these are signs of defeat. They are signs of alignment with heaven. The presence of an enemy is the announcement of divine movement in your life. No enemy rises without permission, and if God permitted it, then He intends to use it. Enemies expose themselves when they think you are vulnerable, when they assume you are unprotected, when they believe God is silent. But what they fail to recognize is that God's silence is not His absence. His silence is the setup. His silence allows them to step forward so clearly, so boldly, so recklessly that their own actions become the evidence against them. God allows enemies to speak long enough to condemn themselves, to act long enough to entrap themselves, and to rise high enough to ensure their fall is undeniable. When an enemy exposes themselves, God is preparing to deal with them. Their exposure is the first phase of their defeat. Every enemy that comes against you carries a hidden assignment from heaven to reveal what needs to be removed and to refine what needs to be strengthened. Some enemies surface to sever you from relationships that would sabotage your future. Some enemies expose themselves to reveal jealousy in places where you thought there was loyalty. Some enemies arise to show you who cannot handle your growth, your elevation, or your divine favor. Their hostility reveals their capacity. Their betrayal reveals their limits. Their attacks reveal their true position in your life. God allows it because clarity is necessary for destiny. You cannot walk into your purpose surrounded by the wrong people. There are enemies you prayed away, but God didn't remove them immediately because their exposure was more valuable than their elimination. If God removed them too soon, you would have continued to trust them, depend on them, or carry them into a future they were never meant to inhabit. So God let them rise. God let them speak. God let them plot. God let them reveal themselves. He allowed the discomfort because the exposure was part of your deliverance. Their actions detached you emotionally, spiritually, and relationally in ways that peace never could. Pain has a way of clarifying purpose. Betrayal has a way of ending counterfeit relationships. Attacks have a way of awakening discernment. Every enemy plays a part in your development. And as they expose themselves, something supernatural begins to unfold. The enemy believes they are weakening you, but in reality, they are strengthening your spiritual muscles. They think they are diminishing your confidence, but they are forcing you to anchor your confidence in God. They believe they are sabotaging your progress. But God is using every attack as a stepping stone into your next season. So the enemy's actions create spiritual momentum. Their resistance becomes the wind that lifts you. Their pressure becomes the force that shapes you. Their assault becomes the training ground where God equips you for greater authority. There are breakthroughs that require enemies. David needed Goliath to reveal the champion within him. Joseph needed betrayal to step into the palace. Daniel needed conspirators to step into promotion. Jesus needed Judas to fulfill his assignment, not because enemies have power, but because God uses them as divine instruments to push his people into destiny. Your enemies are not obstacles. They are ushers. They escort you into purpose. They force you to grow. They motivate you to rise. They sharpen your spiritual instincts. They position you for elevation. What the enemy meant for evil becomes the very thing God uses for good. When God allows an enemy to rise, it is because that enemy carries a key to revelation, a key to breakthrough, a key to elevation. They unlock places in you that comfort cannot access. They unlock spiritual fire that ease cannot ignite. They unlock levels of faith that familiarity cannot reach. They unlock dimensions of prayer that tranquility cannot produce. Your enemies bring out your warrior. They awaken your strategist. They activate your intercessor. They pull out of you what peace never would have demanded. And in the process, they unintentionally prepare you for where God is taking you. Every enemy in your life is temporary. Their voice is temporary. Their influence is temporary. Their attacks are temporary. They rise only long enough to fulfill their divine purpose. Once their assignment is complete, God deals with them. Their exposure becomes their expiration. Their hostility becomes their downfall. Their strategy becomes the trap that captures them. Their words become the rope that binds them. When God allows your enemies to expose themselves, He is declaring that their season is ending and your elevation is beginning. The enemy does not have the final say. Their actions do not define your future. Their attacks cannot alter your destiny. Their schemes cannot override God's plan. They rise only to fall. They speak only to be silenced. They attack only to be judged. And every time they expose themselves, your victory becomes more assured. Their presence is proof that heaven has started a new chapter in your life. Their hostility is confirmation that God is shifting you into greater purpose. Their exposure is the mark of divine acceleration. Every enemy is a servant in the story of your destiny, pushing you forward, even as they try to hold you back. Psalm 109 reveals realms of spiritual operation that most believers never discern because they interpret God's silence as inactivity rather than strategy. This place psalm is not merely a cry for help, it is a revelation of how heaven responds when the enemy rises, plots, and unleashes weapons against God's people. Psalm 109 exposes the hidden courts of divine justice. The unseen mechanisms through which God overturns curses, disrupts demonic assignments, and establishes righteous verdicts without announcing his movements. It shows us that God is never idle, never indifferent, never unaware. He is the God who judges in silence, defends in secrecy, and fights battles long before you even recognize a war has begun. This psalm becomes a lens through which we understand that silence is not emptiness, but evidence of divine governance. Psalm 118. Spiritual exchanges taking place in dimensions the natural eye cannot perceive. Words spoken against you do not simply float into the air. They enter spiritual systems, triggering reactions in the realms of the unseen. Psalm 109 shows us that David was not merely dealing with human hostility. He was confronting spiritual machinery set in motion by the words of his enemies. These were accusations, curses, and declarations designed to wound his spirit and sabotage his destiny. Yet, even when David could not see immediate intervention, God was already moving. He was already responding. He was already intercepting every weapon, contradicting every curse, and overturning every verdict released against his servant. Heaven responds even when you hear nothing. The silence of God does not mean the absence of God. It means his work is happening beyond your hearing. Psalm 109 also reveals how God allows the enemy to speak so their own words become the evidence used against them. David's enemies unleashed verbal weapons with confidence, believing their accusations could harm him. But God used the very words they spoke as the grounds of their judgment. They condemned themselves while trying to condemn him. This reveals a principle. Every curse spoken against you is heard by heaven, and every accusation becomes a witness against the accuser. In spiritual realms, words do not disappear, they become seeds. And the seeds your enemies plant grow into the harvest. They themselves must reap. When God seems silent, he is letting the enemy sow seeds that will become their own downfall. Silence is the period in which the harvest of judgment matures. What makes Psalm 109 powerful is that it teaches believers how to see beyond the natural realm. David's prayer is not merely emotional. It is judicial. He is presenting his case before the divine court of heaven. He is appealing to the righteous judge who hears every whisper, sees every plot, and discerns every intention. David's prayer is a legal petition, not a desperate plea. He understands that God rules from a throne of righteousness and that every enemy who rises against a child of God becomes subject to divine review. This is why God does not always respond immediately. He responds righteously. Silence is not delay. Silence is deliberation. Silence is where divine justice gathers evidence, weighs motives, and prepares a verdict that cannot be overturned. In the unseen realms, curses are overturned through divine authority, not human retaliation. Psalm 109 shows that David did not engage his enemies on their level. He did not attempt to counter their attacks in his own strength. Instead, he took the matter to God. He took it into a realm where the enemy has no jurisdiction. This is a profound spiritual lesson. The enemy can attack you in the natural realm, but he cannot override a verdict issued in the courts of heaven. When God overturns a curse, it becomes powerless. When God rejects an accusation, it loses its influence. When God rules in your favor, it does not matter who rises against you. Psalm 109 teaches that spiritual battles are won not through reaction, but through elevation into divine authority. The psalm also reveals how God shields his people invisibly. David experienced betrayal, lies, and malice, yet he survived every attack because God was working behind the scenes. There are battles you have no awareness of because God intervened before the enemy could strike. There are curses that never touched you because God intercepted them in the spirit. There are words spoken against you that dissolve before they could manifest. God's unseen intervention is one of the greatest revelations of Psalm 119. The psalm reveals a God who fights quietly, protects subtly, and defends completely. Silence is the cloak under which God works his greatest miracles. Another hidden truth Psalm 109 exposes is that God allows pressure to reveal capacity. David's enemies did not rise because he was weak, but because he was anointed. Attacks are spiritual indicators of elevation. The enemy does not fight where there is no threat. He does not invest energy into places that have no potential. When opposition intensifies, it is because your destiny is intensifying. Psalm 1 and 9 demonstrates that the weight of the attack reveals the weight of your assignment. And even though God may appear silent during that pressure, he is watching every move, measuring every action, and preparing an outcome that aligns with his purpose for your life. This psalm also reveals how God uses the enemy's actions to set the stage for vindication. Vindication is not merely deliverance, it is public reversal. It is the divine act of turning accusations, lies, and attacks into testimonies of God's justice. When David cried out in Psalm 109, he was not asking merely for rescue. He was asking for righteousness to speak louder than the lies. Vindication is the loud answer that follows God's silence. The more silent God is, the more dramatic the vindication becomes. Silence stretches the tension, allowing the enemy to believe victory is within reach. But when God breaks that silence, the reversal is so undeniable that even the enemy must acknowledge his power. Psalm 179 also teaches that divine justice is perfect justice. God does not judge based on emotion but truth. He does not respond based on urgency but alignment with purpose. He does not intervene based on noise but righteousness. When God responds to your enemies, it is not reaction, it is resolution. Heaven's silence is the incubation of that resolution. It is the womb in which divine justice is formed. The longer God is silent, the more precise the outcome. God ensures that when the breakthrough comes, it resolves not only the attack, but the root of the attack. He dismantles the scheme, the motive, and the spiritual structures behind it. His justice is complete. Another dimension of Psalm 109 is the revelation that every curse sent toward a child of God becomes redirected. David's prayer reflects the spiritual law of return. What is spoken in malice returns to the sender. The enemy's intentions boomerang, their weapons reverse course. Their strategies collapse onto their own heads. This is not human revenge. It is divine justice. God allows the enemy to activate what will ultimately destroy their own plans. Psalm 100 and 109 shows how God turns the spiritual ecosystem against those who operate in wickedness. The same arrows they launch become the arrows that pierce their own schemes. The psalm also reveals the importance of maintaining purity during attack. David did not respond with slander. He did not curse those who cursed him. He did not retaliate with flesh. His integrity became his shield. Purity in the face of persecution is one of the most powerful spiritual postures a believer can maintain because it keeps you aligned with heaven while the enemy self-destructs. Psalm 19 teaches that your righteousness is your protection, your restraint is your weapon, your silence is your warfare. When you refuse to stoop to the level of your enemy, you remain positioned for divine intervention. Another hidden realm Psalm 109 exposes is the power of covenant. David was not just a man under attack, he was a man in covenant with God. Covenant is what activates divine defense. Covenant is what guarantees that no curse can prosper. Covenant ensures that God will fight for you even when he appears silent. Silence is not distance. It is covenant at work. Psalm 109 reveals that God's loyalty is unbreakable. He is committed to his people in ways that transcend emotion or circumstance. He moves for you not because you are perfect, but because you belong to him. Psalm 109 also unveils how God transforms suffering into strength. What your enemies meant to weaken you becomes the very thing God uses to fortify you. The attacks sharpen your discernment, deepen your prayer life, refine your character, and anchor your identity. The opposition becomes your training. The hostility becomes your preparation. The adversity becomes your equipping. God does not waste warfare. Every battle becomes a classroom. Every attack becomes instruction. Every enemy becomes a teacher. God uses what was meant to break you to build you into someone who can carry greater authority. And finally, Psalm 109 reveals that God's silence is temporary. Silence never lasts forever. Silence is only a phase within the divine process of victory. It is the threshold between attack and vindication, between accusation and elevation, between plotting and overturning. God may stay silent for a season, but when he speaks, everything shifts. When he moves, everything reverses. When he judges, everything changes. Psalm 109 shows that the silence of God is the prelude to the downfall of every enemy and the establishment of divine justice in your life.